think we can get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm excited to kick off this webinar focused on tokenized real-world assets and security token offerings. My name is Matt Moss, and I lead the product team at AlphaPoint. AlphaPoint is a global financial technology company providing digital asset infrastructure that powers the next generation of exchanges, brokerages, payment networks, and banking. Today, we have Philip Tam, founder of CryptoSX and GreenX. GreenX is a leading security token platform in Asia, fully licensed and regulated to provide primary issuance and secondary trading for digital assets. We also have Adam Ianiri, Director of Sales Engineering at AlphaPoint. The topic of today's webinar is Exchange for Web3, exploring tokenized real-world assets and security token offerings. Phil and Adam, great to see you today. Let's start with Phil. Could you please give us a quick intro on your background?
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming and joining this webinar. I have to say this is my first one. For myself, I actually, by training, I'm a chartered accountant. So that actually gave me the initially when I started building an exchange 4 years ago, I started from looking, from a license. All my life, I'm involved with license industry, and believing that the digital world going forward will be regulated, okay? Because we're looking at, securities, we're looking at stocks, shares, bond, investment of different types. At that point in time, 4 years ago, there was, ICO as well. We see, a lot of up and down and probably a lot of down as well. So I was, started to looking at the next phase of this development. So that prompted me to start the previous exchange, which is called Cryptos, licensed by the Philippine government. And then last year, we actually merged with GreenX. And GreenX actually is a subsidiary of a GreenPro, which is listed on the NASDAQ. So that itself also is the evolution of the crypto industry, of STO. And we also see during those 4 years I've done up to today about 10 STO. We've got a very good pipeline as well. And we also see the evolution of the security token themselves and the industry involved. And now we're talking about real world asset. So, that is a very, short of my introduction of myself.
Very cool. Thank you. So Adam, could you give us a quick overview of your background?
Yeah, so I've been with AlphaPoint now for, I think I'm going on the 3-year mark. I've been in the crypto industry since, early 2016. I've worked in a variety of different, systems starting in development. I've been, very close to this decentralized world, and lately I've bridged more into the middle ground of, bridging that gap between, the centralized and the decentralized through, the amalgamation of Web 2 and Web 3 technologies. And that's kind of what I've been doing here at AlphaPoint for the last few years is, helping clients bridge that gap through utilizing and licensing our technology.
Great, thank you. So let's begin with the discussion of RWAs. So we'll just start with the basics. So first, what are real world assets and what is their significance in the crypto space? This could go to either one of you, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a very open question, right? It can be, it can be anything that's created. We're seeing a lot of, and Philip could speak on this, we're seeing a lot of the financial infrastructure from traditional financial institutions moving over to, the blockchain because of the more efficient, movement of funds and, the technology and, the operations and the global access, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, RWAs can, at its core is real world assets. So it's the tokenization or the digitization of, traditional assets and, real world commodities, real estate, et cetera. So it's a very open-ended question that can apply to a lot of different, assets.
Got it. Phil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, completely. Adam's got it on the description of it. I look at it from an investment perspective. So why would people want to do a security token offering? All my clients so far that I've talked with, they are they are, mostly they have been in business for quite a while. Okay, they're mostly, entrepreneur who have owned business before. And the reason they do it because they're looking for funding. Okay, most of them for funding. And if you're looking from a financial industry perspective, they all want to go to IPO, either NASDAQ, or London or Hong Kong or Singapore. But most of their projects are probably not up to that stage yet. So they're looking for some intermediate type, a stage where they can raise some fund. So they think, okay, looks like STO may be a way to do it. And most of them actually are involved in different businesses, like the one I've, my first one was actually Agarwood. It's a medicine, a Chinese, not really Chinese medicine, but medicine that has used extensively in Asia. Okay, and we've done sapphire, we've done rare gemstone, and we have done rare earth element. We're doing rare earth element, Chinese antiques, gold mining. Of course, from a technology perspective, we have EV battery technology. Okay, so it's all different agri technology as well. So technology, of course, then we're talking about a valuation of the business that become asset backed rather than a piece of gold, okay, or an actual gemstone. Then you can measure by the weight, by the carat, or the different characteristic, alexandrite, for example. So yes, and I think one of the main point is that the tokenization can bring a lot of benefits. Mainly is to unlock the traditional, the liquidity, because it's very difficult to sell an antique, to sell a gemstone. So once you tokenized it, then you bring it into the blockchain, okay, whereby you can actually do the fractional ownership. Okay, and that actually allow a lot of, I would say, retail investor that can actually go and have a step, try the journey. If I may just add one point about GreenX, because when I started GreenX, when we negotiated, or rather discussed with the government, I insist that we must allow retail investor, okay, to participate in this exchange for security token. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any point from my perspective. I've done it for 3 years now. If we just cater for professional investors, accredited investor, it's difficult to get liquidity. It actually is very, very difficult. Right. So I'm very pleased. That's one reason why we actually merged the business with GreenX, as we managed to do that.
Yeah,
I think it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, when talking about, the model and the RWAs, what we see two big driving factors being, the first one being, the ease of the technology, right? Instant settlements, easier issuance, lower barrier to entry, less hands in the pot, so less fees, all of these things in terms of the technology is the big thing. The other thing that you mentioned is liquidity, right? Now, liquidity, I see it breaks down into two pieces why people are, entering this asset field. One is obviously what you're speaking about. So, the fractionalization of larger assets. So, like let's say, a small retail investor in, Thailand wanted to buy real estate in Miami. He can't afford to buy a whole house in Miami, but maybe he can afford to put a few $1,000s in, a tokenized REIT or something like that, right? That he could then get exposure to that market globally on a very smaller scale. So it adds that type of liquidity. Also, what we see is a lot of, either traditional or people looking for funding, they're trying to access the liquidity in the crypto markets. We all know that the money moves pretty quickly in crypto, and, there's a lot less barrier to entries, and people want to access that crypto capital as well that we see for funding of these projects. So those are the two, big driving factors at AlphaPoint that we've seen, pushing some of our clients into this, new space.
Right on. So so you just mentioned a couple of them, but overall, what kind of assets are we seeing being tokenized right now in 2024? Bonds, commodities, art, real estate. What are the major kind of assets being tokenized?
Right. From my perspective in GreenX, so in the last 6 months, we launched 3 STO. Okay. So we launched an EV battery technology from Australia. That actually got into the Guinness Book of Record back in 2015. They actually put the battery, it's a lithium battery. At that point in time, it was electrolyte, meaning it's a liquid battery, into a electric bus in Melbourne, and it drove 1,018 miles on one charge. And that was, that's actually in the Guinness Book of Record. And last year, I was in Shanghai, and I drove the new, this this time it's an SUV, but now they have developed the semi-solid state lithium ternary battery. Okay, so that is like a composite with manganese, nickel, and cobalt in the electrode part. That actually allow the battery to have much higher density. And also it has like, minus 40 to 70 degrees. It's actually a big deal because you imagine a lot of EV car in winter, minus 20, they won't work because the battery just freeze. So you have to have a heater to heat the battery in order for it to get charged and release the energy. And then it go to Sahara, very, very hot, then it might explode or melt. So I think a lot of these, battery technology is incredibly interesting. So this is one where we tokenize. And then another one is a gold. Actually, this is a US project. This is the 4 gold mine in Nevada, 3.4 million ounces pledge to 3 billion tokens. So every token is backed by $2 US, okay, of gold reserves. And why doing it? Because they are using the token that is asset backed, and they can actually then be invested by hedge funds, okay? And they can also use forward contract to sell because they are also a mining company, so they're actually mining the gold. Forward contract to sell the gold, and then once the gold is mined, processed, and then they would put 50% in the vault, and 50% is for the asset back the token. And then the third one is a Chinese antique ceramics. So this one is probably the smaller of the three, starting with about 20 million US dollars. But this is also very unique because if you buy antique, you'll be very worried about, is it real? Okay. Secondly, what about the value? Is it really worth that much? Okay. Is it really worth $1 million US or 10 million US dollar? This particular STO with Chinese antique, the owner is a 40-year businessman, also an antique collector himself, with also a dealer. So what he managed to do is to get a expert report, okay, from antique expert. Secondly, they have what you Raman spectroscopy, so it's like carbon dating, but this is for ceramics. Even with this tool, they can pinpoint, okay, this piece of the vase is made in 1715 Qing Dynasty. But then, so what? What about the value? Finally, they get an insurance coverage. They actually have an insurance coverage from the largest of the fine art insurer like Chubb, AXA, AIG. Okay, all these to insure. So once you've got the insurance coverage, the value is that's it, locked. It doesn't really matter whether it's real or not at that point in time because the insurance already covers it. So this is what we've done in the last 6 months. And then, going forward, we have actually very interesting rare earth element. Okay, this is in Malaysia, in Perak. It's a 150 million US dollar valuation, first phase, because they have 1,000 hectares producing 30,000 metric tons of REE. And then we have a gemstone. This is a rare sapphire. So all the sapphire are GRS certified in Switzerland. There are first batch is 28 gemstone, value at 190 million Hong Kong dollar. So that's roughly about 24 million US dollars. So it's the whole bunch. And what we've also done before is whiskey, single malt cask whiskey in Scotland. And that was done in Hong Kong, and it was a Cayman Island fund that actually created that investment. So you see, it's a big variety. a lot of different types of, they're all real world assets, definitely. And then what we just said, we bring it into the blockchain world.
Yeah.
Okay. And
So,
then we tokenized it.
So we've made a couple of references to STOs in the past couple of minutes. So can we just take a step back for our audience and explain what are security token offerings and how do they differ from ICOs in the equity world? I'm sorry, not ICOs, but IPOs.
Right. I think that's a very good question. I think it's important to distinguish that. From my perspective, when we started doing security token offering, it was, there was no real framework. So what we did was to follow the major financial markets framework for IPO. So what does that mean? That means that you have to look at the corporate structure. Okay, you have to look at the shareholders, the management team. Do they have real business? Do they have cash flow? Okay, and they have debtor, they have creditor, the whole management team, and then the business itself is how do you value it. So that will be done from a professional appraiser, usually a certified accountant in the local country, and then he will look at the financial projection, and based on the financial projection, come with a valuation, and I just say, okay, this business is worth 10 million, 50 million, 100 million. So that is the due diligence that we have to do because it's a securities. Okay, a token. Why is it called STO? Because it's a security token offering, like an initial public offering, IPO. That's why we actually follow the framework. Okay, basically we need professional valuation, professional certification. Don't trust me. I tell my client, don't the investor. Trust the professional. Doing the audit, doing the appraisal, or actually in the case of a mining company, the geologist doing a job report, okay, or gemologist, okay, when they actually look at a rare gemstone. So at the point in time when we launched the STO, okay, what we can say is what you've seen are real, okay. They have a real asset, a real business, real management team, people now. And the value is reasonable. Now, whether from that point on, is it going to do 50%, 1x, 2x? That is up to the business. That is not what we will commit. Okay, but that is just like a shares. You have to look at the private placement memorandum or the information memorandum. We do that as well. So every one of the STO, we have to do a PPM. Okay, or information memorandum to give to the investors to look at the whole, the business, as it is. It's just like an IPO.
Right.
So actually, after the client have done an STO, they have a good experience or initial experience of what would be like when we do an IPO. That's how why I say we're looking at the financial journey. Okay, so all my client, I can say, but what do you really want? If you're looking to get listed in NASDAQ or in London, we will have to design a corporate structure so that you won't get stuck. So you won't do an STO. Sorry, you've done STO. If you need to do to NASDAQ now, you need to restructure. You need to take it all to pieces again and restructure. So we take all of those into consideration when we do the STO. Okay, ICO. I think we're all familiar with ICO. You do a white paper and with a large, pinch of salt, leap of faith, you buy or not buy.
Right. So I have a question for Adam. So what is AlphaPoint's strategy with regard to RWAs and STOs? How do we add value?
So where AlphaPoint plays in the mix, right, is a lot of these, protocols that are, used to launch these RWAs, whether it be, whether if you're just doing, an ERC like 1400 standard token on Ethereum, or you're using like, Polymesh or Ondo or, Canto or whatever it might be in terms of what tech you want to use to support your token offering. AlphaPoint bridges the gap because most of the retail investors that Philip spoke about, or even institutional investors that we're talking about, may not have the knowledge to access those assets, right? You have to know how to custody them. You have to know how to interact with them. You need to know how to submit transactions properly, gas fees, all the things that come into Web3. So most of these people that may want exposure to these assets aren't Web3 native people. So what AlphaPoint does is our tech layer, our exchange, and our layer bridges that gap where people can onboard in a Web2 fashion, have an account, trade those assets in a centralized manner between each other or with a market, and not have to worry about custody, have to worry about interacting with the blockchain, not worrying about have to, submit transactions, worry about losing their private keys, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It almost goes back to the same, I think one of the points Phil's been touching on, repeatedly talking about STOs is I'm working with GreenX, there's a piece of consumer confidence there, right? That they know that it's insured. Those gemstones are real. The ceramics are real, or if they're not, they're insured at that value. The proper checks have been done on the mining regulations to make sure that though that ore is there to be mined and backed by a certain. So there's a consumer confidence there. AlphaPoint does the same thing, right? We give a consumer confidence in the holding of the assets and the utilization of the technology. Whereas if they're using, their own private wallet or accessing through the decentralized world, they're not going to know a lot of the nefarious activities that happen there, where they could be connect to the wrong network, get a wallet drain, all of these things that could happen. We instill that consumer confidence from a technology perspective. So, Phil and his team are instilling consumer confidence from a business perspective. And then AlphaPoint instills consumer confidence from a technology perspective and an ease of use.
Cool. So you just made reference to Canto and a couple of other players. Who would you say are the major players in the RWA space right now?
Major players. I would say some of the major players are, I had to go through them all. Let me think of what's top of mind. Maple, Canto, Maker, Polymesh is, they're getting really big in the space. They have their own chain that makes it a lot easier to interact with. They use APIs. They use APIs rather than having to actually use a smart contract. And they're all KYC'd. So to use their platform, you have to be your wallet has to be KYC'd on it, or they use something called a DID. So Polymesh, and they launched also an option to have a private blockchain. So if a corporation wants to have a private blockchain, you could do that through them as well, and it'd be bridged. Centrifuge is another one. LCX, Goldfinch, Clearpool, and then obviously Ondo. Ondo is one of the the one that is center stage right now with working with BlackRock on their BITL fund. So they're center stage with the in the RWA space right now.
Yeah. So what kind of challenges is the industry facing right now in terms of tokenizing and trading real world assets? What are some of the kind of negatives or problems that have to be overcome?
I think
Either of you.
I think from where I'm, standing, liquidity is number one. It's number one. It's still young. I think this market still needs a lot of development. Still need to introduce, like now, introducing. You can invest a digital asset. You can put a small percentage of your wealth, okay, as part of wealth management, into digital assets, into something that you can sleep. You can have a good night's sleep. You don't have to worry about crashing tomorrow, or crashing in the next hour. So I think this is a challenge. It's the number one challenge, actually. That's why I started from the beginning to say the centralized exchange or the license regulated is difficult. And you see a lot of the real world asset type are mostly US Treasury bonds or corporate bonds. Okay, things that give you a decent yield, or not decent yield, some kind of yield. But the real world asset that I'm doing right now are more, not related to government securities bond, although we are actually talking to several, government in Europe. They do want to use, have like real estate, their own community housing type, doing a bond, solar energy bond. So I think that is something that, will be developing, moving very fast as well, because that the volume is quite significant.
Got it. So you just mentioned yield. something I wanted to ask about. So how does yield fit into the picture? You know, in terms, obviously many RWAs are ripe for generating yield, and there's obviously a regulatory component to this. So where does yield fit in?
Mostly, how do you get yield? Traditionally, yield means from you make a profit. So once you make a profit from your business, okay, from the project, so after deducting, you have to be distributable reserve. So you have this distributable profit, and then you do a dividend. So that becomes a yield. So for all the RWAs STO that we've done, that will be generated from traditional profits. Okay, not really in a way like they're just staking. Okay, staking mostly is you give, you make your own token, you give them more token. But here you really need to have the USD or whatever currency your business, reside in, you generate, and then you then change it into USDT, USDC, or other tokens and drop it, give it to your token holders.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a differentiation, Phil, right? Between, RWAs, there's STOs, which, anything providing yield is, by the Howey test, obviously is defined as a security, right? Whereas commodities are like the gray area, right? Tokenizing commodities, because they're not providing yield. Like these fixed income products are always going to be around, and you can see it even with Ethereum and, everything happening on that chain. Everybody's, really focused on, yield and fixed income and all of these different products. But when it comes to, the ones that are commodities that aren't yield bearing, the barrier to entry is typically lower on those for tokenized.
Right on.
Yeah.
So where is the RWA and STO industry headed? Where do you think this is going?
Well, we have so much kind of inquiries, and people actually genuinely wanting to do it. Like the market we are looking at right now is Korea in Japan. Okay, Korea, we're looking at the next phase. Why Korea? Because we're looking at the DeFi space. Korea only have 20-odd million people, but their crypto market consistently the top. Okay, and it's highly regulated also, right? They have a lot of asset. Japan have huge amount of asset. We're talking about art, we're talking about real estate. So they have actually come to us and discussing with how they can tokenize, their assets and then have it, traded, outside of their country. So this is an area that we're also looking into actually right now, coming up with new product type, that can, cater for the requirement, because it's changing very fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So from a regulatory standpoint, what kind of challenges do we foresee from the regulatory space, regulatory hurdles, and any other challenges, technological limitations, things like that?
Regulatory is $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
That's just, we're watching it unfold in real time. We could speculate on how regulators are going to handle it, but I think it's just being able to ebb and flow. And I think Phil's done that great in the past. Like, as things change, he changes and he adjusts regulations, and as those change, that's going to happen. In terms of technological, I think working with somebody like AlphaPoint, right? Like bridging that gap, because the technology is being democratized in a sense, but we're just not there yet where, non-native Web3 people can access a lot of these protocols yet. And that's one of the liquidity issues, right? When dealing with STOs in a centralized manner, you need to have liquidity. Whereas in the decentralized space, right, you can access AMMs or DEXs that, support their own liquidity basically to an extent, right? Or people can provide liquidity in a decentralized manner. So you open, access to liquidity a little bit easier, where, liquidity does provide a challenge in the centralized sense, but, working with market makers and, having a robust community and really picking the right products that people want access to is going to provide that liquidity.
Yeah. Going to that point, I think what we like about the DeFi space is the automated market making. I think, the liquidity pool, that makes a lot of sense. That will, self-generate, not self-generate, but you need to put the liquidity in first. But that actually almost ensure that, there will be trading, there will be bits and offer, versus in the centralized world, there's no offer, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
right? And that's why we see there's a lot of players in the area that are trying to bridge the SEX and the DEX world, right? So they're trying to access that liquidity via solvers and all of these different mechanisms, and we see that happening in real time, and it's going to be very shortly because you still need the centralized exchanges to provide the consumer confidence, the ease of use, the real-time transactions. But when they're able to source from the AMMs, then you have, real-time liquidity available always.
Yeah.
Right.
Completely. I think that's why we're working with AlphaPoint is to have the platform, okay, where we can do all the due diligence, okay, where we can talk to the customer, tokenize it, talk about corporate structure, help them to how to market it, in different space in the Web 2, Web 3. This is a work in progress.
100%.
So is there any topic that I haven't touched on yet that you guys would like to talk about right now? Certainly a million things I could ask, but anything
I'd
you
like,
want to bring up?
I'd like to ask Phil, you've done so many interesting things. Where's your vision looking into 2024, 2025 in terms of, new assets you want to create on the platform, new protocols you want to work with? Is there anything you guys are focused on at GreenX?
Well, GreenX actually is the first ESG Sharia compliant exchange. Now, what does that mean? Because we're in Malaysia, our headquarters is in Malaysia. Sharia compliant means we have to abide by the Muslim Sharia principles. Okay, that actually opens up to us 1.9 billion Muslim communities around the world, and that's a big. It doesn't mean that we only allow Muslim projects or we only allow Muslim religion. That's not the case. It's just the principle. Okay, so we are actually looking at leveraging in the Southeast Asia, in Asia anyway. There's a lot of natural resources that is prime for RWA. Okay, there are a lot of small businesses, medium businesses that wants to get funding, and we would help them to do the tokenization, and then they can actually decide if they want to go IPO. Okay, so we are looking from a very traditional way of helping our our project owners and giving the investor product types that they feel comfortable with, that they can relate to.
So when you say, they're looking for funding and you're really focused on, the natural resources, is this funding for prospecting for like, resources? So they get the funds and then they'll go out and they'll try and, survey for those resources. Is that kind of how
No, that would be too big. Any of those, we're talking about like REE, you're talking about 100 million for a plant, a small one. Okay, you need about 500 million. Like RE is 17 elements, so you have to process it. The higher it goes, the value, you can, instead of selling at 20,000 a ton, you can sell it at like 250,000 a ton. So we are really just helping them to provide the preliminary, like getting the license. Typically, land, they must have got the land themselves already. So getting some technology license, okay, operating expenses to start the initial mining, and then we're talking about serious project financing. Yeah. So on the other hand, we talk about when we talk about the sapphire, that's from a private collector. So he already bought those gemstones. Now that's different ballgame. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is typically turning an illiquid asset into a liquid asset and allowing a lot more people around the world to participate in buying this. One gemstone that I look at, the blue sapphire, 189 carat. Very, very beautiful blue sapphire. It was $4 million US. That big, beautiful, like a marble. So
Wow.
those are incredibly interesting.
Yeah, we've seen some
See
interesting
a lot
things.
of that.
We've seen some interesting things come through our side as well. We've seen such stuff as, when you talk about real world assets, how, unique it could get is, tokenization of, trading cards and Pokemon cards and,
Right.
NFTs, right? Which aren't real world assets, but they fractionalize the ownership of, digital assets too, right? So we've seen some really interesting people get very interesting with these plays. Even some of the real estate stuff, you see, clients buying buildings and they sell off each unit in the building and then they rent it out. And then whoever owns that token for that particular unit gets paid out the rent as yield on that specific. So now you open, a global landlord kind of economy to anybody in the world that has the capital to be doing that through this mechanism. So it gets very interesting down the road as it evolves.
And I would just, one more point I would like to add is all these security token project, the most important element, besides, of course, the funding, how do you get the funding, is the business model. If there's no business model like Adam what just described, okay, you're looking at very different. How do you make it available, with a unit that nobody can, not nobody, but difficult, like 10 million a unit, or even $1 million US, a unit, is the business model. How do we make it interesting, okay, for the investor to put their money in? That's the most important, element that we work with each of our, or our project owners to make sure that the business model will work, for themselves as well as for the token holder.
Agreed, 100%.
Great. Okay, so I think that we could wrap up the webinar now. So thank you very, very much, Phil and Adam, for joining us today. And thank you to our webinar participants for taking the time to learn about tokenized assets. If you're interested in further information about AlphaPoint, please contact sales@alphapoint.com. If you're interested in GreenX Digital Asset Exchange, please visit them at green-x.io. And we hope you learned a great deal today, and we wish you much success in your own crypto endeavors. Thank you all.